everybody, I'm Courtney Queen from the recipe website Butter for All, and today we are talking all about mold on your sourdough starter. So if you've ever struggled with mold before, then this is the video for you. We are going to be discussing what mold looks like, what it doesn't look like, why you got the mold in the first place, what you should do when you have a moldy sourdough starter, and how to prevent mold from returning or keep it at bay forever. And these are all really important things to understand if you're going to be a successful sourdough baker. I've been baking with sourdough for 20 years and I've written many recipes, and I'm really excited to be here to share my knowledge with you and help you grow into a really great baker. So let's talk about what mold looks like. Mold is going to grow on the top layer of your sourdough starter, so right on that top layer. And it's going to be a funky color like white, green, blue, gray, black, yellow, even pink or red. And it's going to be fuzzy. Mold is always fuzzy, it has little hairs on it. And that's a really telltale sign and characteristic of mold, is this fuzzy appearance. So if you suspect mold, you should probably rule out the two things that it isn't. And mold isn't hooch. Hooch isn't mold. Hooch is a dark layer on top of your starter that has liquid. It's a liquidy layer, and it doesn't have any fuzzy growth on it. And hooch is not scary. It's something that we're going to talk all about in a future episode. Mold is also not cam yeast. Cam yeast has a really similar appearance that can be easily confused with mold, but there are some key characteristic differences. So cam yeast grows on the surface just like mold does, but it usually has a really interesting patterning, kind of a symmetrical patterning or little wrinkles or bubbles, and it's usually white. And it does look different than mold, but for somebody who doesn't know the difference or has never seen them side by side, it can be really a striking look-alike to mold and can be really confusing. Cam yeast is not that scary, but it's not great either, and it's something that we're going to talk about in a future episode. So if you feel like you've seen cam yeast on your starter in the past, then stay tuned for that episode so that you can really diagnose it and also find out what to do to revive from it. So there are some questions as to why you might have gotten mold in the first place on your sourdough starter. And unfortunately, mold is all ever present in our environment. And if you have mold in your environment, it can easily get into your sourdough starter and contaminate it. So you want to definitely be checking your environment for mold. Is it under the sink where the pipes are? Is it in the bathroom behind the toilet? Is it in the closet or the pantry in those dark areas? And you want to really look and scope it out to see if it's reoccurring in your environment and reoccurring on your foodstuffs, then there's a really good chance that it is in your environment. So another place it can hide is in the dishwasher, is in the pipes that take water from your water supply to your refrigerator or your water filters. These are all really important places to look for mold. And if you suspect it in your environment or you see it in your environment, you should have a certified mold inspector come out and tell you how to remedy it and take care of it from there, because mold is not healthy for you or your children or your pets or your ferments or your starter. So let's get it taken care of if it's in your environment. It can also come from how you store your starter. So if the top of your starter dries out, it makes a really nice landing pad for mold spores. And mold spores will just land on that dry top. And because they're not being exposed to the lactic acid that builds up in sourdough starter, there's no way for the sourdough starter to protect itself against the mold. So I never recommend a tea cloth or a cheesecloth over your starter as a form of keeping things out of it. It dries the starter top out. If that cloth has a mold spore on it and it falls down on there, it's going to start mold on your starter. So I always recommend a screw-on lid like this, but not screwed down all the way tight, just a little bit loose to allow for some expansion of gases. Or my favorite, which you can see my starter is in right now, is a locking lid jar. And I just have the rubber seal removed from the inside of the jar, and that's gonna keep just a little bit of space for expansion of gas, but also keep anything from falling in there or getting, or letting the sourdough starter dry out. So the locking lid jar is a really great way to keep a starter fresh. A third way that you can get mold is the way that you're feeding and maintaining your starter. So like I was saying, if there's not a good balance of lactic acid in your starter, it's going to allow other microorganisms to kind of take hold in there. So what you want from your starter is a really good balance of bacteria that make lactic acid and yeast. And the way to achieve that good balance is by regular feeding, regular use, and really keeping your starter healthy and alive. It's a living being, and it needs that food and that attention to keep it thriving and healthy. If you neglect it and you don't feed it and you let it sit out at room temperature for many, many days, it's just all of that is going to contribute to a higher likelihood of it getting mold or some other imbalance. Mold can actually come from your ingredients. So if you have flour that has been exposed to mold spores and then it's damp, it can contaminate your starter. So you want to keep your ingredients fresh and dry. And the best way to do that is to store them in an airtight container in the refrigerator, especially if you have large amounts. If you don't have a large amount and you're using your flour really quickly, then you can store it at room temperature in an airtight container, but something with a nice lid that snaps down. That's the absolute best way to store it. So we've talked about where it comes from and why you might have gotten it on your starter, but we should talk about what to do if it is already on your starter. And unfortunately, the answer is to trash it. It's compost at that point. Mold is not something you want to mess around with your starter. It does grow on the top layer, but it's not something that can just be scraped off. And the reason is mold has a mycelium network that grows down into the starter, so potential for the entire starter to be contaminated with mold, and you're just kind of playing with fire if you scrape the top off. You might have reoccurring mold, and it might come in an inopportune time, like when you want to bake bread. So it's best to just get rid of a moldy starter and start over from fresh. Getting some starter that's already established from somebody that has a really balanced, healthy starter is a great place to start. But if you want to make your own from scratch, that's a really fun project and it can be done really easily. And I'll leave a couple links on how you can do that. So if you want to keep mold out of your starter or prevent it from ever returning, there are a few steps that you should take. And it's really a great practice, even if you don't have mold in your environment, and even if you've never had mold on your ferments or your starter before, and that is to sanitize. And so I have two methods of sanitation that I like to use. The first is in the dishwasher. If you have a nice, clean, modern dishwasher with a sanitized cycle, you can run that cycle. It brings all of the jars and equipment up to temperature, and it kills any pathogens that might be present. So that's a great option if you have a nice dishwasher. But a surefire way to do this with minimal effort is the boiling water method. And you can see that big pot behind me. All you need is a big stock pot. Basically, what you do is fill it up with water and bring it to a boil. And then any equipment that can go directly into boiling water that you use regularly with your sourdough starter, dough whisks, wooden spoons, jars, lids, they can all be submerged in that boiling water for 30 seconds or more. So a minimum of 30 seconds. And at that point, you can fish them out with tongs, lay them on a towel to air dry, and those equipment have been sanitized. Jars require a little bit more preparation, and that's because you do not want to put boiling water into a room temperature or cold jar. It has the potential to crack the glass or shatter the glass, especially if you have older jars that have been used for canning. Canning will weaken that jar with the expansion and contraction during temperature changes. So I've had it happen to me when I've put a jar into boiling water and the bottom has fallen off or it's cracked down the side. And so you want to avoid doing that. The best way to do it is to fill these jars up with hot tap water and let them sit for about 5 minutes before you do any boiling water. And you can submerge the jar right there into the boiling water at that point after it's been warmed up. You can do that with canning tongs or with a canning basket if you have one. Or you can leave your jar in the sink and pour the boiling water directly into the hot jar. And that way you don't even have to mess with putting your jar into the pot. Now, with the locking lid jars, there is this other piece here that you'll also want to sanitize. And you can actually take this hardware apart here by pinching it and pulling the lid off. And if you take the lid off, it's much easier to sanitize the lid in the boiling water. So those are the simple ways that you can sanitize your equipment to prevent mold from reoccurring or even taking hold in the first place. And like I said, every time I start a new ferment, especially with vegetables, my sourdough starter is in pretty good shape because it's 20 years old. It's very healthy, it's very balanced, so I've never had mold on it. But if I'm going to start a batch of cucumbers for pickles or sauerkraut, I like to sanitize my jars first. It's really important. It helps a lot with keeping out anything funky. So that's basically it. That's mold on your sourdough starter in a nutshell. And I hope this video was really helpful for you and that you learned something and that you're going to take it on to, become a really great sourdough baker. So thanks for joining me and stay tuned for more episodes. Make sure you subscribe and leave me a comment if you have something specific that you want me to address, and I'll be happy to talk about it in a future video. Thanks so much.